do it.
There we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm Jamie. I'm with Metro Council. And thank you for being on our Mental Health KC webinar. So we are the group that's putting this on. We are Metro Council. It is a collaboration between all the community mental health centers in the Kansas City metropolitan area. So there are 7 of us, plus Mental Health America of the Heartland and Center for Behavioral Medicine. So really excited you guys could be here today. We do have free webinars on the 2nd and 4th Thursday of the month from 12 to 1. So keep coming and joining us. Now that you've come to one, or at least one, you'll be on our distribution list to be able to get all the information for more webinars. So a couple things to note about webinars. So we're using Zoom webinar, so you're only able to see the presenter, the amazing Lara Ashbaugh, and myself. You will not be able to see each other, but you will be able to communicate through chat and through the Q&A. So please do that. We love the participation, but we have Zoom webinars so that way we can have as many people as possible as part of our webinars. At the end of our day today, I will put the link for the certificate of attendance in the chat, so you'll be able to access that as well. So a couple other things, please save the date. We have our Mental Health KC conference coming up. So we are so excited. We have a new location, new date, new partners, incredible breakout sessions. So please save the date, May 23rd and 24th. It's a Thursday and Friday. It's a all-day Thursday, so 9 to 4:30 on May 23rd, 9 to 12 on May 24th. So don't worry, you still get out plenty of time to go celebrate Memorial Day weekend. So, and with that, you will get contact hours, lunch, snacks, and it will be at Johnson County Community College. So we actually have 2 whole buildings through Johnson County Community College. We are going to have over 60 breakout sessions. So get really excited. We have a lot of opportunity for you to learn whatever you would like to learn, whether you're a clinician, not a clinician. We have different tracks. So we have a clinical track, we have a non-clinical track, and really excited to be offering this to our community. We are also opening it up to the whole region. So when I say region, I mean like anyone in the Midwest is welcome to come. So we actually have keynote speakers from all over the nation. We also have breakout speakers actually from all over the nation that are coming in. So hope you all can join. With that, I'm so excited to introduce Lara. So quick little disclaimer, we've had Lara speak numerous times. I'm not worried about anything she's saying, but we say this for all of our webinars, that the views and opinions presented are those of the speaker and do not necessarily represent the opinions of Metro Council. So we just always say that. But I know Lara is a phenomenal speaker, and I'm not worried about her presentation. So I'm going to introduce.
Really controversial, I promise.
Lara's going to be talking about belonging, which is a really important thing to be discussing. So I'm going to share though a little bit about Lara. So,
oh Lord.
Okay. So Lara has her master's degree in clinical psychology, is a licensed professional counselor in Missouri and a nationally certified counselor. She has worked in the field of community mental health for over 15 years. And in that time, she's worked as a crisis in a crisis stabilization unit, residential facilities, outpatient case management, and an outpatient counseling center. And she currently provides clinical and administrative training, as well as supervision and mentoring in her role as senior project coordinator at University Health Behavioral Health. She's passionate about finding and utilizing the person's strengths to help them build the life they want. And outside of mental health, she teaches lifespan development psychology and abnormal psychology at various community colleges and universities. And in her spare time, she enjoys spending time with her family, seeing movies, and traveling the world. So with that, I am so excited to introduce Lara. So thank you.
Jamie, I appreciate that. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Heather. I noticed that you like my presentation, so that is really, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I will carry that for the rest of the day. So thank you for saying that. And I will plug, no one asked me to do this. You guys should absolutely go to the Metro Council conference. It is a great conference. They do tons of great speakers, usually me included. I often speak at that one. But it is a really great conference. I highly recommend. So thank you. And I'm here today to talk about belonging, which is a topic of which I am very passionate about. And so at any point in time, if you've been to my webinars before in the past, I love questions, I love comments, I keep the chat open, and I try and pay attention to that. So do not hesitate to ask a question, drop a comment, and I'll do my best to either address it right then in that moment or let you know it's coming up or get to it at the end. I kind of try to balance all of those things at the same time. And so I am going to share my screen. Okay, and I will also share the PowerPoints with Jamie at the end. So if anybody wants them, you can also have those as well. So with that being said, so belonging, I said, is a topic that I am very passionate about, and I will share my own personal experiences with feeling like I belong or don't belong. And of course, my experiences are those of my own, and I offer them as a point to kind of illustrate different ways to think about and ways to approach this concept of belonging. There are many, many, many other examples. I simply share mine as those are my experiences that I have dealt with throughout my life. So to start with, we always I like to have a good goal, like where are we going? What are we talking about? What are you hoping to get out of this? What I hope you walk away from today is a sense of what it means to belong, why it's important. And I will be taking somewhat of a business kind of perspective. These principles can be applied in many different settings, but I will lean a little bit towards that like business point of view of like, why do we want to have belonging in our workplace? Why is that valuable? Why is there a business cause for it? Not just a human, the moral right thing to do, but how does it actually help our businesses? That's a little bit of the slant I'll take on that today. How does it fit within DE&I? And then ultimately, what is our role in helping develop this sense of belonging? So those are some of the things I hope you walk away from today and today's, the next 50 minutes or so. So it's always important to start with a definition. Why and what is it that we're talking about? And I think belonging is one of those. And this is actually something I find a lot in psychology as a whole. These words that we use, like we kind of know what they mean. Like there's an innate sense of like, well, I know what it means to belong. But really, really digging into the definition really helps us clarify and have that clear perspective and picture on it. So when we think about what does it mean to belong, a lot of people use the language to fit in. Belonging means to fit in. And I want to kind of challenge your thinking on those two things being the same. When we look at these definitions, and if we really get down to like the nitty gritty and the emotional and the biological aspects of belonging, it's really more than just fitting in. That is, many people think of fitting in as changing who you are to belong, whereas true belonging is to be welcomed for who you are in all of your glory and your foibles and everything in between. So when we look at our definition of belonging, this top one I think really kind of stands out to me. And I'll draw here on my slide. So belonging means to be suitable, to be appropriate, to be advantageous, to be in a proper situation, and to be a member or of a club of organization. So this is our dictionary definition of belonging. But I think it's that first definition that really gets to and speaks to the heart and soul of what it is we're talking about when it means to belong. And that really like deep emotional, physical feeling of, I'm not just here because people let me be here. I am here because I belong here. I don't just fit in, but I am suitable for this place. And who I am as a person is allowed to be here for who I am. So we really get into the word belong. I also get kind of nerdy about the historical like, what's the right word, but the background of a word. So really belong is be and long in, which is to be suitable. So when you really think about suitable, that connects to a very deep rooted piece of our psychology and our biology. So we go back to this concept. We've all seen this one. This is our Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and belonging is in here. It's listed on the third rung, And I think many of us in mental health will spend a lot of time thinking about these bottom two. You need food, you need water, you need security, you need safety. We all know these pieces. But I think really looking at this belonging piece, it's not just I need to have friends. It's not just I need to have family and a support system. What we're really saying when we're saying we need to belong is we need to feel like we as a person are suitable for this environment. And now think about what it means to be like that idea of suitable, of what it means to really belong, that you are allowed, that you are wanted, that you are desired in a place for who you are. And that is really the deep, deep key aspect. And there's a lot of places that we'll get to here in just a minute of people who don't feel like they belong. In lots of ways, we feel othered. And we get into the biology, we think about evolution, and we think about us as a species. If we don't belong, then we don't survive. So there is a deep survival piece connected to this sense of belonging. And in many cases, sometimes belonging actually will take precedence over some of these lower levels of the rung. So there's a lot of discussion in the research about Maslow's hierarchy, and is it necessarily like a 1, 2, 3? Is it really this levels, or are there variations within that? And I'll give one example. I wish I could remember the name of the show, but I watched a documentary about chefs and people building restaurants and things of that nature. And there was a woman who was a first generation immigrant from, I'm going to say like Singapore, Thailand, somewhere in the Asian region. And so her and her mother had come over, and she talked about when she was young and in school, her mom would make bao buns for her lunch. And so she would go to school with a lunchbox full of these bao buns, which are, if you're not familiar with a bao bun, it's basically a dough wrapped with meat and filling inside, and then usually steamed. Typically nowadays they're a little bit more, you can find bao bun places, you can find restaurants like that. It's a little more not say mainstream, but a little bit more mainstream in our society. But in her day in the 80s, nobody knew what these things were. And she would go to school, and she talked about remembering as a child, she was embarrassed of the food. People would comment about the smells that it made and how funny it looked. And she would go to school and she would throw away the food her mother had made, and she would go hungry so that she would belong in that group at school. And that was one reason why, as an adult, she created a bao bun restaurant to kind of honor her heritage and her mother, and almost like in some ways kind of ask for forgiveness. And because she said, we didn't have a lot of money, and I threw away what little we did have so I would belong with these girls in these schools. And I think that's a beautiful example of the push pull between food and belongingness, and how in that moment she made a choice. Belonging with this group in school is more important to me than eating. And there's many, many different examples of that we'll kind of continue to talk about. But I think it speaks to that innateness of belonging isn't just a nice thing to have. It isn't just, well, I hope I have that. It is a need, not a want. It is a need to feel that we are suitable, that we are meant to be in this location. And we get into the biology, we gotta love biology. We really also see this echoed in our biology as well. What we see when you start looking at brain scans and different aspects of the brain that are lighting up and being utilized in different places and different times, what we see is our brain actually responds to rejection the same way we respond to pain, thirst, and hunger. So the pathways that say I'm hungry, the pathways that say I'm hurting as I cut myself, the pathways that say, oh my gosh, I'm so thirsty, are the exact same pathway that says you don't belong and you've been kicked out of the group. So we experience rejection on a biological level in the exact same way that we experience physical pain, thirst, and hunger. And that tells us, again, we're going back to it's a need. So what we do in every single setting, whether it's conscious or not, we ask ourselves, do I belong here? And there are simple ways that we do this. I think I teach college, okay? And first day of class, there's always that moment of, am I in the right place? And that's a very simple, but still that question, do I belong here? And, the first thing I do as the teacher, one is I worry that I'm in the wrong place. And I worry that my students are in the wrong place. And I'm like, hey, are we all here for intro psych with Lara Ashbaugh? And the group is like, yeah. And I'm like, cool. Well, I'm Lara Ashbaugh. You're in the right place. I'm in the right place. Check. And that we do this in every new environment, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. So our brain, because we're hardwired for threats, because that's our brain's job, is to keep us safe. That's one of the threats it's looking for. It's not just looking for, do I have food? Do I have shelter? It's looking for, do I belong? And our brain is constantly assessing us versus them. That, do I belong here or am I different than here? And that speaks to how we act and how we behave and how we treat each other. And if we decide that we're and them and we don't fit in and we don't belong, our brain reacts with threats. We respond with our fight or flight response. We respond with the threat response in our limbic system. So our body goes into fight or flight mode. Our heart rate increases, our breathing increases, our digestion decreases, our sympathetic nervous system turns on when we realize we don't belong. I'm not meant to be here. I'm a them, not a us. And we feel that in the same way that we feel physical pain. So we start thinking about belonging and we get into this idea of what it is and what it looks like. It's not just, oh, cool, that's nice. We want people to feel like they fit in. No, we want people to biologically know that they belong here and that they're safe here. And that's a very different emotional and physical thought process. So belonging is not just a nice thing, it's a need. I'm hoping you're starting to see that. So when we start thinking about aspects along the spectrum of belonging, we know where we fit. And we're going to have a lot of different, that's a good word I'm thinking, a lot of different kind of data points with which we reference our sense of belonging. So this is where we start to get into DEI. So we start to get in diversity, equity, inclusion. We look at all of these aspects of intersectionality. All of these pieces of who we are as people is going to play a part in where we fit, that we belong. We're going to evaluate on each of these different reference points. Do I belong here? Do I belong here? Do I look like other people? Do I act like other people? Do I belong in all of these various different aspects? And that is where this connects with our DE&I initiatives. Because one of the goals of DE&I is inclusion. We want people to be part of the world. We want to hear diverse voices. We want to hear diverse perspectives. We want people to be who they are. And part of that is being welcome at the table. Because there's a difference between having the table open and being welcome at the table. Those are two very different places. And belonging is really about being welcomed at the table. There's been plenty of places. So I'll use an example. Many of us may have had this experience. So let's pick class. Okay. So, I've lived most of my life somewhere on the spectrum of middle class, from lower to a little bit higher, depending on a variety of different factors. But on the whole, I've been in the middle class. And in terms of that, and I also like to go places. I like to do things. I mentioned travel. I love to go shopping. Okay. And there's lots of places where I'm allowed to walk into. Anybody is allowed to walk into Neiman Marcus. Anyone is allowed. I'm a shoe person. Anyone is allowed to walk into Ferragamo or Prada. We're allowed to walk into these places. But if you have ever walked into a store that is above your budget and price range, you feel real fast like you're not supposed to be there. You learn DE&I is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you will actually find a lot of places nowadays will use DEIB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. They actually add the B on the end, recognizing the importance of this sense of feeling. So we think about when we don't belong, there is this very uncomfortable feeling, and you know it right away. And I've had this experience. I've been, like, oh, look, here's this like fancy shoe store. I'm going to walk inside. And the minute I walk inside, I'm like, this is not my store. I do not fit. I do not belong. I am not suitable for this location. And they're going to figure it out real fast that I can't afford any of these things, but I'm going to pretend like I can. But it's very, very, very uncomfortable. And and I think many of us have had those kinds of experiences when we walked into a place that we didn't belong, when you're in the wrong classroom, where you're in, maybe some of us had this experience through COVID, when you're in the wrong Zoom room. You ever had this experience where you click the link and you're sitting there, you're staring at like nothing, and you're like, did I click the wrong link? Am I in the right place for this right meeting? And that sense of uncomfortableness, that sense of confusion, that sense of disconnect is that sense of belonging. And that is on one level, because it's different when you're in the wrong place than who you are as a human is in the wrong place. That is a deeper aspect of belonging. So what we do is we look at all of these different aspects of who we are and we make that determination. Do I belong? And depending on, sometimes some of these are more obvious than others. I, as a white woman in America, on the whole, can walk into most places and feel a sense of belonging because people look like me. Now, I've also been in my many travels around the world. I've been in places where I am not the majority, I am the minority. And I'm aware that I don't look like anybody else around me. We spent a month in Japan last year with my husband and my son. It was clear that we were not Japanese fast everywhere we went. And there was this little sense of like, am I going to be allowed to be here? How are people going to treat me? And that is, for fun and part of my joy of travel. But some people experience that every single day. And so we need to think about what levels and how are we helping people feel connected, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But we all are in these different levels going to evaluate and ask that question, do I belong? Do I look like people who are here? Do I have the same level of education? Do I have more or do I have less? My sexuality, do I belong? My ability, can I do the same things? I think about, there's lots of discussion about ableism and looking at, are we able to access our, meetings and offices in a way that is feasible for all people of all abilities? Our age, our gender, ethnicity, culture, language. There's a lot of these pieces and parts that we are constantly, whether we are consciously or unconsciously, making that determination. Do I fit here? So here's an exercise that can be helpful. And I do apologize. This is from the book Belonging. And so it's a little fuzzy, but I do think that the purpose and the goal is still going to be similar. So what you essentially do is you look at your social identity. Okay. And you look at not only what do I identify, and then do I identify as the dominant or marginalized in this particular realm? And then the next question is, how often do you think about having this identity? Because sometimes these are not identities that come up as often in certain settings. Other times they will. So what we do is you go through each of these, in the socioeconomic class, where do I place myself? Education. So like, for example, in education, I have a master's degree. I'm very proud of my master's degree. In most places where I go and I work and I spend time, having a master's degree is typical and expected. So that is not something I think about all that often because most everybody else around me is very similar. And on occasion, and I always tell this story, I was doing some volunteer work for the city of Independence. And so I was in a location where people didn't really know me and it had nothing to do with my job or any of the places I normally spend time at. It was, everyday people from all walks of life in Independence. And this lovely gentleman was chit-chatting with me, as people do. And he asked a question that has stuck with me for years. He asked me, do you work? And I think I laughed like somewhat oddly and uncomfortably. And he kind of looked at me strange. And then I realized I was like, oh yeah, that's a question that makes sense for you from your perspective. But if you knew me, that is a question you would never ask. I work too many things. I have too many jobs, and I always have. But it was a very different, I'd never even considered the fact that some women don't work. And that the first question is, do you work instead of where you work? It really kind of took me, it took me a minute to kind of think through that, because I don't think about that identity. But that is in that moment and in the world I live in. Everyone else has different experiences based on your education level and based on the environments in which you go into and are wanting to belong to. So we think about all of these things. We kind of go through this list: education, national origin, religion, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, mental, physical ability, age, body type, size. That certainly plays a role. Tribal or indigenous status, and then ultimately caretaker status. Each of these pieces is going to play a part in how we identify and how we feel and understand that. I'll give another example. So caretaker status can refer to children. It also can refer to elderly parents as well. So it doesn't just specify who you're taking care of, just simply that you are taking care of another person. And I have two very distinct memories. One, when I first started at my job here at Truman, I did not have children, and I got pregnant, but I didn't really know people, and I didn't really know like what was the vibe in this location. And I was really nervous to tell my boss that I was pregnant, because I didn't know what the culture was in this location. Is this a place that supports parents and children and mothers and pregnancy, or is this something that's going to be seen as a liability? And it took me a minute to like work up the courage to tell my boss, because I'd only been working there like 8 weeks. And when I told her, like, she came across the desk and hugged me and was like super excited. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a nice feeling. And I've learned where I work is very family friendly, but not every place and location is. I didn't know how that status was going to change that experience. And then I've had different statuses. Like right now where I teach at, I'm the only professor who has children who are of school age. Every other person I work with either doesn't have children or has children who are grown and in college, which is a very different place to be in life. And so the social norms are separate. And so that caretaker status is something that will shift depending on your location and depends on how you fit in. I've been places where it kept you apart, and I've been places where it made you feel more connected. So part of this exercise is thinking through not only what are my identities, but is this a dominant or marginalized in my location, and is something that you think about. You may not think about these, and they may not cross your mind as something that you are using that checklist of do I belong, yes or no, but they also might. So you're welcome to use these slides. I will share them with, I'm sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay, I will happy to share them as we go forward. So this exercise lets you think through what your identity is. And here's the thing, we all have an identity, and I really want to stress that. I worked with a coworker one time who was a white male, and he was like, I don't have culture, I don't have identity. And I was like, that is inaccurate. You do not have to be of a minority to have a social identity. We all have a social identity that affects us in many ways, and we all are looking for where we belong. So one of the things that we do, and here's where we start to get into the workplace a little bit. In the workplace, people will downplay and intentionally not disclose a known stigmatized identity in order to fit in with the dominant culture. 61% of employees in the US will cover some aspect of who they are at work because they do not feel that they will fit in for that dominant culture. And we're going to cover in a couple of different ways. And I will give some personal examples of these. Okay. So the 4 ways that we cover at work are going to be through our appearance, our affiliation based on our relationships, advocacy, and association. So let's start up here with appearance. So we will cover in terms of how we groom ourselves, our hairstyle, our mannerisms, and our attire. So I will give 2 examples of this for myself. You may not be able to tell, but I have blue hair. And it did not always used to be blue. It doesn't grow this way. I make it this way. And there was a very conscious, concerted effort when I made the switch. I was blonde and then I went red and then I decided to just make the leap and go blue. And I read every policy in our handbook. I talked with people. I did a lot of things because I wasn't sure how it was going to go over when I made that shift. And I've had people, I actually had someone after the last time I did this presentation. She came up to me and she said, "You're right, Laura. Um, I thought differently of you after you colored your hair. And I thought that, maybe you didn't, what was the word she used? She's like, I did think less of you as a clinician when you changed your hair color." And she goes, "Now that you think about it, like that is ridiculous because you're the same person, whether you're blonde, blue, or bald. Why did I let your hair color affect what I thought about you and your clinical skills?" And I was like, "Thank you. I appreciate you being honest with me. And I appreciate that you thought about how that shift changed in terms of what that means for a person's ability." And so, this goes into there's a lot of cultural aspects to appearance and grooming. All of the conversation in our culture about Black hairstyles and the rules around schools and what can and cannot and is not allowed. Dreads aren't okay. This isn't okay. The language we use around that is all about othering and separating and making them feel like they don't belong. When reality is it's hair and it is a part of our identity and a part of who we are. And it is not all of who we are. It does not define us by our hair. So grooming makes a difference, hairstyle, mannerisms, attire. Other example I give, when I first started working at my agency, as you might well imagine, having blue hair, I do like a little bit of color, I like a little bit of pizzazz. I wore a sequined sparkly shirt one year and I got called Sparkles for like 6 months. And I realized that maybe this wasn't the place to wear sparkly, shiny things. And so I started changing how I dressed and I shifted to fit, to cover. And that really took a toll, truth be told. Like, it seems like a silly thing. You're like, you're just changed your clothes. Why does that matter? They are expressions of who we are. And when you're covering who you are, there is a shame about it, that there's something wrong, that there's a judgment about you. And it shifts how you feel about yourself. And so that is also why this makes a difference. And we have to be aware of what are our policies, what are our languaging, how do we talk about these things? So appearance is one way many people cover. Affiliation based on relationships. So marital status, gender of partner, caregiving status. So people will, in many places, they will not talk about, I have children that I'm caring for, or that I have parents that I'm caring for, because that may be seen as your work and your focus is divided. Therefore, you don't do as good of a job here. And I might be treated differently. Many people, there's, my partner, instead of my husband or my wife or my spouse. People use some of that language to kind of hide and cover what their spouse is and what that relationship is, because they don't know how that is going to be met inside of the community and inside of the workplace. Advocacy, here's one that's interesting. People are less likely to speak about topics central to their identity. So this is where you might have a person who is of LGBTQ status who does not speak up for LGBTQ because they don't want to draw attention to themselves in the same way that they would when they make that point. Because when they make that point and stand up for other people, that puts them in the category of other. And that puts them in that place of not belonging. And that leads to that disconnect. There's all of these pieces that play a small role. And sometimes this is conscious, sometimes it is unconscious. It really depends on, I think, the setting and a little bit about which piece of intersectionality we are talking about, as well as the consequences of said intersectionality. Some people, ostracized, fired. There is a wide range of consequences to particular statuses. And so depending on what that looks like is going to depend on how much people cover and how they choose to engage in that kind of way. And along the same lines is association. People intentionally avoid socializing with other group members. So for example, A lot of organizations nowadays are creating, they're called FRG groups, or they're like minority groups. They're groups that are meant to help people of different statuses work together, build relationships, whether it is minority status, people of color, whether it is gender, women groups, LGBT, different groups to help support each other within the workplace. And it is possible that people don't go to employee resource groups. Thank you. ERGs, that's what I'm looking for. Those are wonderful. Those are great. That's a really important part of belonging and inclusion and DEI efforts. And you want people to feel safe going to those things when they, kind of that guilt by association. Yeah, affinity spaces, right? You have to look within your organization. Not only do we have these, but do we have them in a way that is accessible and safe? If I go to these groups, is there going to be some sort of, consequence, negative backlash? Am I going to not feel like I belong? Is that going to create an issue? And that is something that workplaces, leadership, as well as the staff have to really reckon with and think about. Just recently is one I hadn't thought about. So as a teacher, as a professor, there is a teacher association and a teacher union. And there was a conversation about you might be afraid to join the union until you're tenured. And I was like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. And even considered the fact that being a union member might put you at odds with administration, leading to a disconnect or a lack of belonging or a different connection. So all of these pieces are going to play a role, and we have to think about what that looks like. So I'll take a step back here to our intersectionality. All of these pieces are things that people are looking to, that are making and weighing on, do I belong in this place? Do I belong in this family? Do I belong in this room? Do I belong in this workplace? Do I belong in all of these different aspects along these different lines? So our goal as humans and as businesses and professionals is to help people feel that sense of belonging and being aware of that and doing what we can to help provide that sense of belonging. So what can we do? Well, here's how it's helpful is when they feel like they belong, they are more attached to their organization and occupation. And that's what we want. We know if you do any research on sustainability, on retention, on turnover, over and over and over again, you're going to hear the people need to feel like they belong. They want to be here. They want to attach them. We want to connect them. We had people had different opinions about it, but we had this whole like, your best friend is here at work, because there's research that shows when you have a friend at work, you're more likely to stay there. So when they are more attached, they're more likely to stay. When they are here, they have a greater sense of psychological safety, which allows for innovation. Because if I don't feel psychologically safe, I'm not going to make suggestions. I'm not going to offer a point of view. I'm not going to offer ways to improve. I'm going to say, yeah, that sounds great, and move on, because I don't want to bring attention to me. I don't want to be ostracized for having the wrong idea. So that psychological safety is really key to both good work, but also innovative work. We need people to say, this isn't working, and here's what I'm seeing. I have this idea that might make it better. That's how we improve as a workforce and as professionals. And if they don't feel safe to say that, then they're not. They're more engaged with their colleagues. And really, it comes down to this very simple thing. If I don't belong here, I'm going to find someplace else that I will. And that's really what it comes down to. And most of the time, whenever I talk to people, the reasons for leaving are usually, if you really get right down to it, it's usually going to have some sense of belonging. I don't fit. I'm not listened to. I'm not liked. I'm not the same. I'm not valued. I'm not respected. All of that language will speak to, I don't belong. I'd be happy to define psychological safety. But so psychological safety, and here, give me 1 second. I like to be fancy and exact rather than giving my 1 second. So psychological safety, when I think of psychological safety, it is a sense of comfort. It is a sense of, let's see here, let's put up here, a mentally, so like think physically safe is like, I'm not going to be harmed. I'm not going to be, kicked or shot or punched or like starved to death. I'm not going to have these physical things happen to me. I am physically safe. Psychologically safe speaks to our emotions, our personalities, who we are as people. So I'm pulling up a definition here. Okay. Yes. So, for example, team psychological safety is a shared belief held by members of a team that it's okay to take risks, that it's okay to express ideas and concerns, to speak up with questions and admit mistakes. That is psychological safety. So it is the safety of our mental processes, similar to the safety of our physical bodies. So it is a boss that is willing to answer questions. It is a coworker you can say, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Here's how I'm going to fix it. There are locations and places and work spots that are, those things are not okay, where you don't admit mistake. You find a way to blame it on somebody else. Otherwise, you're going to get fired. Yeah, exactly. Or you have a boss, you ask a question and they like take it personally and like yell at you about asking a question and like questioning their authority. And you're like, oh, okay, don't ask a question. Check. Don't do that. That is psychological safety. When you're safe mentally, my emotions, my thoughts, my feelings, those things are safe for me to express. Obviously, I'm going to say appropriate, in reasonable, socially acceptable ways, but those are safe for me to be. And when I feel like I belong, I'm going to have a greater sense of psychological safety when I am welcomed for who I am. So I will give an example, um, both about intersectionality, belonging, as well as psychological safety. So one of my pieces of intersectionality is I am celiac. Okay, so that means I cannot eat wheat, oats, rye, or gluten. Okay, as a autoimmune disorder that on the whole does not affect me in my functioning or ability. It just limits my food choices. And as many of us know, food is usually a really big deal for people. And I have a very distinct memory when I first started my job and they wanted to take me out to lunch. Oh, you're a new team leader. Let's go out to lunch. And I was like, that's awesome. That's so kind of you. Thank you for taking me out to lunch. And then the conversation became, where are we going? And in my head, I had a panic moment of, oh no, I don't know this town. I don't know what the menu is. What if they take me to lunch and I can't eat anything? Is that going to be seen as like rude? Are they going to like judge me for not being able to eat? Are they going to be mad that we didn't eat where I wanted to eat? Like there's all things that ran through my head over something as simple as where are we going to go to lunch? Welcome to the new, like welcome. It was meant as a nice thing, but for me, turned into this moment of anxiety. And so in that moment, I didn't know, I don't know these people. I don't know, if I say, oh, I can't eat gluten, are they going to tease me? Are they going to make fun of me? Are they going to be like, what's gluten? That's just some new agey thingy. There's a lot of stuff that can come from that. And so it took a while in this conversation as they're tossing out ideas and I'm trying to like juggle the conversation about where to go eat without letting people know why. And so I was trying to like play this like really delicate role of like, I don't want to be too picky, but I also don't want to go eat at the pizza place that I know doesn't have food that I can eat. And I'm going to be stuck with a salad. So it took a while and I've kind of managed it. And eventually I told people, I was like, hey, FYI, this is what I have to eat. And in the places where I spent that time, those coworkers were so caring and like loving that they would come to me. And nowadays, what they do is say, hey, Laura, we want to go eat out lunch. We're looking at this place. Can you check the menu and make sure there's things you can eat? Thank you. I feel like I belong. I feel like I matter. in this thing with my role of having to eat. And it seems like such a small thing. And I get really on my like horse about whenever we offer food, we offer more than bagels and donuts to people, not just for me, but for other people who want to eat healthier, eat less sugar, have other maybe kosher standards, other things that we want to consider, because it's meant as a nice thing and a nice gesture, but it's not experienced as a nice gesture if you can't take part in it. It just feels like a slap in the face. And so it is very much that sense of, if I don't belong here, I'm going to go find someplace else. And that is not what I quit because, I mean, I might, truth be told, if I was in a workplace that teased me, made fun of me, like wouldn't let me bring in my food, like said, too bad, so sad. I'm sorry that all of our nice things that were supposed to be helpful to you can't eat. Oh, well, might eventually find a different place to go work because I would not feel like I belonged and that I mattered and that I could be me in that place. So the other piece is our customers. So not only going back to like how this affects us in our business, it's not just keeping people, it's also how we interact with our customers. Because, as a mental health professional, my customers are people too. And they have their own sense of intersectionality and a sense of belonging. Do they feel like they belong in my agency when they walk in that front door? Do they feel like when they sit down with me for therapy that they belonged in that room? That's an important question to ask. And how are we helping people feel that sense? How are we helping them feel welcomed and understood and connected in just a few moments? So I'm trying to pay attention to the time here. So what do we do? How do we help people feel like they belong? What does this look like? So we could go into a whole other thing about inclusive leadership, but I'll just give this little quick snippet here because I think it speaks to all of these pieces. Part of it is being curious and recognizing other people have other experiences than your own. We'll take the food example. I was talking with a coworker about food issues and my struggles with food. And she goes, well, at least there's something you can eat. And I was like, not, fortunately, this is a person that I felt safe with. And I was like, I want you to think about what you just said. You just said, at least there was something you could eat. And I was like, take and put any other, well, at least you could make it so the first floor, we don't have elevators, you have a wheelchair, but hey, at least you got into the first floor. Oh, well, I'm sorry, you couldn't go to the rest of it. That language is othering, and that language is disconnecting. And so being curious and recognizing other people have other experiences and asking people those questions. What are ways that you feel safe? What are ways we can support you? And listening and being curious about those other experiences of what it means to have large natural hair, what it means to be heavy set, what it means to have food allergies, what it means to be neurodiverse, any of those pieces and parts, being curious about that, asking those questions. And that's a very DE&I kind of point of view as well. Being humble and culturally humble and curious really makes a huge difference. That cultural intelligence, recognizing not everybody sees the world through that same cultural frame. My frame is very much, white, middle-class American, born in Missouri, female, higher education. Like that is my point of view. That is my perspective. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but that's my point of view. And there's a lot of others besides any of those. And recognizing and seeing other people see it and learning about it. Collaborating, working together with other people. Learning about listening to others, considering other points of view. That collaboration is huge. Pardon me, commitment, staying the course. We are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and that means X. And we're going to keep on it, and we're going to keep being better, even when it's challenging, even when people kind of make me feel a little uncomfortable and people kind of scare me a little bit, or I feel shame because I messed something up. Like part of that is acknowledging, like, yeah, I messed it up, but I'm sorry. I'm going to do better next time. And here's what that looks like. I think about I take great pride in being inclusive. I take great pride in helping people feel like they belong. And yet we all still make mistakes. I had a coworker who used they, them pronouns. And for the life of me, I, for whatever reason, made a mistake in the same like conversation like 3 times where I misgendered. And instead of using they, them, I used she, her. And I caught myself and I saw the look on her face and I recognized, I was like, oh, I've screwed up. And when I apologized, the apology was not so she would make me feel better. I said, I'm sorry. That was hurtful and unintentional. And I want you to know that I will do better. And I do not need you to say it's okay, because that's not, your job is not to make me feel better on my mistakes. My job is to be better and not make mistakes so that you feel better. And that's a very different perspective when it comes to apologizing. But it's about sticking with it, acknowledging, honoring, and continuing forward. As you can well imagine, I also work really hard to have food for people. I really pay attention to, are we providing food for people? Do I ask what their food needs are? Because it is such an othering experience to not have things to eat. And but that is my experience and my background and my, where I come from. Courage to talk about our imperfections, to tell a group of strangers that I misgendered someone and how horrible I felt about that. That takes courage, and it's important to continue to do this work. And I think that's why we struggle sometimes at DE&I work, is because it does take that courage to say, you know what, I messed up. I should not have said that. I should not have done that. I have created policies that have been hurtful to people. That sucks. Hate saying those things. But without saying those things is not going to make change. And so all of these pieces, anybody can do, whether you're in charge or not in charge. We can be curious, we can ask questions, we can think about other perspectives, having awareness, the word cognizance, just a simple awareness that our biases are different. And sometimes we have to fight these innate biases. I will share this. This is a new research I was reading. I'm very into neurodivergence, ADHD, autism, those type of things. That's kind of an area of interest I have. And I was reading something about some theories why people who are neurodivergent are more likely to be bullied. And it stems back to a bias, but it stems back to a biological bias. If you are familiar, I'm going to try and write it here. There is something called the uncanny valley. Uncanny valley. My husband's an artist, so he talks about these things a lot. So the uncanny valley is what we use a lot with AI and robotics. It is this like mental, there's a trigger in our brain that says you are not human. So with robotics, with animation, with art, you have to create it in such a way for people to realize that it's human. And if you don't do it right, you get too close to the uncanny valley, people realize and feel uncomfortable and feel anxious, and they're like, that's not human, and they reject it. So one of the theories about neurodivergence and why they are more likely to be bullied is because they act differently. People with autism, people with ADHD, people who are neurodivergent act socially different. They talk socially different, to that point where it triggers this uncanny valley internally in us. And it triggers us to say, you don't belong. You are not human. You are different. You need to not be part of my group. So there's almost, it's not just a social bias and an experiential bias. There's almost a biological bias that we have to overcome, because we as a species keep safety in numbers and in our groups. Our group belongs. My group is safe. Your group is dangerous. And how we categorize people, it was some really intriguing research looking at that. It's like biological bias related to the uncanny valley, just as a random aside. And last but not least, as I'm running out of time, is what we can do. Commit to self-education. Come here, listening to me, thinking about, how do I belong? How do people around me belong? Where do we categorize? Just walking through that social identity exercise can be really beneficial to know where you are and where your biases and your blind spots might be. Apply an inclusion lens to your everyday work. So that means, who am I leaving out? Whose voice is not being heard? So you ask that question. It's not just who have I heard from, but who have I not heard from? And what is missing in this question? What is the piece that we're lacking? And we're constantly asking that in our everyday work. That's going to help us have less blind spots. Communicate this. It helps us be better at our job. It helps us be better at continuing to provide services, because people want to take our services, get involved, learn more, and then ultimately take a leadership role where you stand up and you say, hey, we left this out. We didn't think about this, and that's a problem. What can we do about that in the future? But ultimately, it goes back to, I'm going to flip real fast, to these two pieces, which is, what is our social identity? And ultimately, do I feel that I am suitable? Do I feel like I belong in this place? And if I don't, where am I going instead? And what can I do to help people feel like they belong? That they matter. They don't just fit in and change themselves. They don't just cover, but they are who they are authentically, realistically in the workplace. And it is absolutely key to lifelong learning, continuous learning. We're always learning. And that leads me to the last section. I'm going to stop sharing. I have like 4 minutes for questions, for comments, anything of that nature. I've been looking through the chat here, trying to make sure. How do we become inclusive leaders in an that's a great one. Okay. Ooh, that is a really challenging. So the question in the chat, for those who may not be able to see, is, how do we become an inclusive leader in an unsafe work environment, meaning an anti-DEI culture? That is a really great point. So that's a really big question. I think, so honestly, this is going to sound strange, and this is me off the cuff. I'll be real honest. Okay. My thought process in being in an unsafe work environment that is anti-DE&I, I think, as much as like I see the wrong and I see the inaccurate and I see the problem with that, I think just like with therapy, just like with how we help people change, is you have to acknowledge and validate where they are today before you can then push for change. You know, my clients who come to me who are like, I want to lose weight, I want to be less anxious, I want to be less suicidal. I can't immediately say, well, yeah, because that's wrong and bad, and you need to be different in all these ways. I have to start with that initial piece of validation. It's scary. It's hard. This is difficult. So I think, honestly, one of the first places to come from is an understanding of why they are anti-DE&I. Now, that doesn't mean you agree. Validation never means agreement or acceptance. It just means acknowledgement. You know, is it fear? Is it uncertainty? Is there, misinformation? When we understand their perspective, it helps us then make a better plan for how to counter. If we immediately respond with, you're wrong, you're bad, it puts people on the defensive and makes it that much more challenging to move into those places. So to answer I would say, start with understanding, start with that piece of perspective, and then move into, how can I start finding the cracks? Where are those moments of illustration where I can point out the business benefit for this? Where can I start showing the value in this in small ways and building upon those small ways in that form and fashion? That would be my 5-second answer to that very big question. I hope that helps a little bit. And I see a whole big conversation here to say, my understanding is 17% of people on the autism spectrum maintain employment. High suicide rate. Yep, absolutely. Rather than understanding there's, you always sit. Yep. So I think part of the, like, the sense of inclusion is recognizing the value in other people, recognizing, just because you're different doesn't mean it's bad. Sometimes it's different that is innovative. And I think that's that piece of the business case. Like, here's the benefit to having different perspectives. Here's neurodivergence is helpful, is really showing all of those pieces and demonstrating that. And thank you. And yes, I'm speaking at several conferences this spring. Jamie. I've not officially been given word that I'll be speaking at Mental Health Council. I've put in a couple things, so hopefully they pick at least one of those. I will be speaking on this topic at the SETI conference in June in Columbia. So yes. Other questions? We're out of time.
So I want to thank Laura so much. This was incredible, and I thank you for putting this together for us. So thank you. I don't know about everybody else, but I thought it was phenomenal. I mean, Laura's always phenomenal, by the way. Like,
Oh, I
um,
try.
she won't say that about herself, but I can say that. That her presentations are just incredible. And Dre, you're so right. Like, this is so needed. And so I'm glad that we're starting to talk about this, that we're starting to talk about the importance of belonging. And I loved how you fit it into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I don't think it's talked often about. But it's such an important part. And it's not just having friends or family or like it's feeling like you are part of something. And I love that. So
I appreciate it.
thank you.
Absolutely.
And if anybody has any other questions, we'll probably stay on for a couple more minutes. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you for all the lovely warm comments in the chat. I super appreciate that. That I will take those for the rest of the day and feel good. So thank you. Okay.